Hello, I'm Lisa Ann de Garcia, founder of Whole Child Learning Solutions. I'm a learning specialist with an expertise in elementary mathematics. I've been around children with special needs my entire adult life, starting out of high school working in a severe to profound unit in a residential facility. My first master's degree was in deaf blindness, and my 16-year-old has autism that severely impairs his language to the degree that he cannot access the curriculum in the general ed setting. I've been working in the elementary setting for the past 22 years in multiple capacities. Currently, I work with students who struggle in mathematics, but it should be no surprise that most of these students also struggle in reading and other curricular areas. In the last 6 years that I've been in this position, I have spent every moment learning everything I can about how they learn and the best way to teach them. As a result, I am now a licensed brain gym instructor, a consultant for Bloomberg Rhythmic Movement Training, working on teaching licenses for that as well, and a provider for programs such as Interactive Metronome and the Listening Program. I'm also a certified functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, or in simpler terms, a functional health coach, because I know from personal experience and research that the physiological state of the body, such as nutrition, plays a critical role in the readiness to learn. So today I want to kind of blend all of that together and talk about the physiological aspects of stress. Because the premise behind Brain Gym is to remove the stressor so that the brain is better able to communicate from the front to back, the top to bottom, and the inside out. Thus, the individual can be at a more optimal state of learning. And the premise behind functional diagnostic nutrition, or FDN, is to remove stressors that are contributing to the metabolic chaos in the body to help the body restore its own natural functions, which translates into physical and mental well-being, and for our children, an ease of learning and reduction in behavior issues. This presentation is geared for the parent. So I'm going to ask you to take out a piece of paper and a pencil. If you need to, you may pause this recording while you get your supplies. I would like you to first write the alphabet. While you do, I want you to notice how the pencil feels in your hand. If you have any tensions in your hand, your arm, your shoulder, or your neck, notice the ease in which you are writing, your internal dialogue, what you are saying to yourself. As you write this, your motivation. Are you breathing? Or is your breathing shallow and not breathing deeply? When you finish this task, turn your page over, and this time you're going to write the alphabet, but I want you to use your non-dominant hand. You're going to start from Z, work to A, and write every letter in a mirror image of itself. As you write the alphabet this time, again, notice any muscle tensions you may have in your hand, your arm, your shoulder, your neck. Notice your internal dialogue or your motivation this time. Are you grasping the pencil in a way that you normally would, or are you overcompensating because your grasp is weak and you have to hold on tighter than normal, thus having more tensions than the other hand? Okay, this is what a 5-year-old feels like when it's asked to write when their fine motor skills are not ready. They overcompensate in order to comply, but without the appropriate experiences, structures, and scaffolds, they do not only develop a poor pencil grip in which they will be nearly impossible to correct later due to their muscle memory, but they can experience muscle tensions in the hand leading later to carpal tunnel or just a dislike of writing because it's laboring and tiring for the hand. Think about the differences between the writing of the two experiences, your motivation and ease. When it was more difficult, you may have had to think more about it. You might have been worried about whether or not others would be able to read it. So let's think if we've seen any of these following behaviors. Have you ever noticed letter or number reversals, poor sitting posture, spatial difficulties, clumsiness, poor hand-eye coordination, eye tracking difficulties, poor pen grip, maybe chewing on pens and pencils? Or how about just poor handwriting, or slow at copying tasks, unable to sit still, fidgeting, wiggling, eyes glazing over or staring into space, difficulty in listening and fully comprehending what is being said. Maybe the child is becoming emotionally overwhelmed or shuts down. They beat themselves up with negative self-talk. Or do they find it difficult to be fully present and attend to the task sufficiently? Feeling constantly on alert. Find it difficult to see the alternatives or just to make choices. Worry about making mistakes. Maybe drifting off into a dream state and finding it difficult to pay attention. Procrastinating and having difficulty getting started. Or blanking out during a test when the answers were known just a few minutes beforehand. Okay, these are all examples of the manifestation of stress in learning. So many of these can also act as a stressor, but brain gym, FDN, and other interventions can address these problems. So if we look at this symbol as a state of balance, where each half represents a hemisphere of your brain, the left hemisphere is where we start to put the details together when we're learning new information. We might say to yourself, we're getting it. The information is then moved, when it's kind of put together, to the right hemisphere, where the information gets kind of more holistic viewpoint, and is moved to the hippocampus to be put into long-term memory, which has more connections to the right hemisphere. So at this stage, when it's in the right hemisphere, we would say to ourselves, okay, we got it. So we have the pieces, and now we see the whole picture. However, if in stress, we experience limited access to one hemisphere, since it limits the connectivity between the corpus callosum. If a child has limited access to the right, he is in the try-hard mode. So he's trying to put the pieces together, but he doesn't have access to the right, so he's unable to transfer the information to the right side. So he's unable to put the information into long-term memory. These students are the ones who struggle, but the teachers will comment that it's not for the lack of trying, that they try really, really, really hard. They just can't get it, and they just have a really hard time with memory. But on the other hand, if the child is unable to access the left, he will be unable to put the pieces together, and will typically not even know where to begin. So this might be the child who opens the book and just says, I don't know what to do, without even reading the directions, and they get overwhelmed and give up. The body has memory of stress for your whole life. So to illustrate this, I want to engage you in a little activity. So you're going to pick an area of the room around you to represent a classroom, a workshop, or a learning experience that you really loved and couldn't wait to go. When you have chosen that experience, I want you to get up and walk over to that area you have identified in the room. So if you need to pause to think about the experience and think about which part of the room that you need to go to, you may do so. As you walk toward this space, notice your internal dialogue, your muscle tension in your shoulder, your back, or sacrum. If you are breathing, stand in the space and just be in that environment. Okay, now I want you to shift your weight from one side or one foot to the other. Notice if you move easier one way than the other. Shift your weight forward and backwards. So go forward kind of towards your toes and back towards your heels. Is it easier to move forward or back, or is it hard to move in either direction? Now move up and down, so kind of squatting and then standing. Which direction feels heavier? Or perhaps do you seem to sink or fall to the ground? Now pick a different area of the room, and this time it's going to represent a class that you really didn't like, the one that you wish there was a snow day for, an experience, it was just a very negative experience for whatever reason. When you decide what the experience is, I want you to move toward that room or that space, stand there and be in that room. Are you breathing? Notice your muscle tension. How about your motivation for either going towards that space or being in that space? Okay, now I want you to again move side to side, shifting your weight from foot to foot. Do you glide easily between both sides? Or is it hard to move in one direction? When you're done, I want you to move front and back on your toes and your heels, and then up and down. So what differences did you notice when you were in this space versus when you were in the space of the experience that you loved? You're probably noticing more tension, negative dialogue, as well as perhaps less balance when shifting your weight to the different directions. All learning experiences have an emotional stamp with it by the limbic system, which is in that middle part of your brain under the cortex. So I want us to think about what implications does this have for the classroom, or if you're a mom, a homeschool mom, for your child in the school setting, or just in general. All right, so there are two simple exercises that you can do while in this negative space to help your body become more balanced and kind of rid itself of the negative emotion that is attached to that experience. So the first one is hookups, and you can see the picture on the slide, and the second is positive points. You can do them in either order, together, especially if there's somebody there that can hold your positive points while you're doing your hookups, or you might just choose one or the other. Just depends what your body asks. So to do the hookups, you're going to cross your feet. You can be standing or sitting or laying down, but stay in that negative space that you're in. Then you're going to put your arms out straight with your thumbs down. Put one arm over the other, lace your fingers, and then bring the interlocking hands up towards your chest. Rest your tongue at the roof of your mouth and then engage in some deep breathing. Hold in that position for about a minute or two or until your body feels complete. So you can turn off this recording until you're finished. And then you're going to unhook your arms and legs and put your fingertips together and hold for a minute or two. So there's two parts to the hookups. Positive points are on your forehead. So simply just touch them gently with the tips of your fingers. You might even wait until you feel like a little pulsing under your fingertips. And when you're done with these exercises, I want you again in that negative space to check your dimensions by shifting your weight from side to side, from front and back, up and down, along with your inner dialogue, your motivation, checking your muscle tension, your breathing. And what do you notice? Okay, you may notice a change in how you feel about the situation and being more balanced in the dimensions and a state of reduced tension while in that negative space. So when in stress, the amygdala, which is in the limbic system, can shut off the communication with the prefrontal cortex, causing us to react from our brainstem and sympathetic nervous system rather than being rationalized about the situation from our prefrontal cortex. This is called the fear paralysis reflex. The FPR emerges in utero and is triggered when the cells of the fetus are exposed to stress of the mother, toxins or substance which it is sensitive to, and they shut off the environment by producing stress proteins that make the cell membrane hard to penetrate and diminish the active transport over the membrane, and it causes the fetus to withdraw and stop moving. This reflex should be integrated once it's born and transformed into the Moro reflex, or the infant startle reflex, which later becomes a more mature adult startle reflex. But there are many factors that may prevent this from integrating, or once integrated, it may come out. So for example, toxins, sensitivities, vaccines, illnesses, accidents, traumas, high fevers, These are things that can affect the myelin sheathing of the nerves and compromise the connectivity in the brain. So due to these stressors, many of our children, as ourselves, have unintegrated fear paralysis reflex. So this is most noted in the child who is selective mute or painfully shy, and all the children on the spectrum. So one of the triggers of this reflex is eye contact, which is why when we work on the integrating the reflex, especially in adults, we might test it by noticing if they would like to maintain eye contact. So we might want to think about if we're reprimanding our students and demanding that they look us in the eye, we are, just to know, we are absolutely triggering their fear paralysis reflex. So it might be a little bit counterproductive. So children who are in the chronic state of the Moro reflex, so the Moro reflex is switched over from the fear paralysis, and this is our fight or flight. So the fear paralysis is the freeze part, the Moro is the fight or flight. And we can, when they have this, they have an active tendon guard response. So that is like the tightening of the backs of the legs, the tendon, what the body's ready to flee, but it wants to protect it, the tendons and the muscles. So it kind of tightens up and puts us into this forward stance. So it's very evident in our toe walkers. They're in a constant state of anxiety, and they are over focused on the environment, and this, their body again is prepared to flee. So, and over time, it can become a habitual way of moving, and the muscles literally shorten. All right, so let's take a deeper look at what happens in our body when we're under stress. So as we mentioned, the fear paralysis makes cell membranes hard to penetrate, which means there's a limited communication and a flow of material and nutrients from one cell to the other. And I also mentioned that the amygdala disconnects the limbic system, or the emotional area, from that prefrontal cortex when in stress. We also saw that stress affects our breathing and muscle tension. Not breathing, by the way, is tension of the diaphragm, so it is also a test of the muscles. But what are some of the other physiological responses to stress? So first, we need to know there is good and bad stress. But note that the body doesn't distinguish between the two. So for example, imagine you just won the lottery. That would be considered good stress, or good situation, but your body would be reacting in the same way. So in this kind of stress and in the fight or flight response, it calls into action several of the body's most powerful hormones and scores of neurochemicals in the brain. We receive the messages from the senses, which go through the hippocampus. Okay, and if you recall, the structure stores memory, which is why emotions play an important part of memory. The amygdala sets off a chain reaction and assigns intensity to the incoming information and fires off messages that cause the adrenal glands to release different hormones at different stages. So first, the norepinephrine triggers impulses from the sympathetic nervous system in the hypothalamus, which calls the adrenal glands to dump epinephrine into the blood, and the heart rate and the blood pressure increase. So just by the way, norepinephrine arouses attention and dopamine sharpens and focuses it, which is why ADHD kids have to get stressed out a little bit to focus, because they have poor connections between that limbic system and the frontal cortex. Cortisol is also released so that the liver can make more glucose available in the bloodstream, at the same time blocking insulin receptors at non-essential tissue and organs, and shutting down certain intersections so the fluid flows only to the areas important in fight or flight. So, by the way, in chronic stress, cortisol amasses a surplus of fuel supply around the abdomen and inner organs, visceral fat, which itself to produce more hormones. Mental processes are very competitive. So if one structure is active, it comes at the expense of another. If the hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenal axis, this stress loop, if it's guzzling all the fuel to keep the system on alert, the thinking parts of the brain are being robbed of energy. So a little cortisol helps with memories, which is why we need some excitement to learn. But too much cortisol suppresses them, and an overload can erode the connections between the neurons and destroy memories. If a potential memory comes along during stress, it has more difficult time recruiting the neurons to be part of its own new circuit. So therefore, it is chronic stress that makes it hard to learn new material and not a lack of motivation, which is very important to understand. So on this slide, we can get a little different perspective on this stress loop. The hypothalamus receives sensory input from the amygdala. It sends signals to the pituitary gland, which then sends signals to the adrenal glands, which are located on the top of the kidneys. They make many of our hormones. The adrenal glands then send out the cortisol and signals the liver to release glucose to the necessary areas of and the different hormones are sent out and signals are sent back to the brain, and this loop kind of continues over and over. Okay, so I'd like you now to take a moment, pause this recording, and brainstorm on a piece of paper some different stressors, either for you or your child or your students. What are some different common stressors? So if you look at your list that you just wrote down, you may have written down some things such as work, homework, negative relationships, money. All of these are stressors to our body. But if you notice, they're all considered emotional stress. We also have other kinds of stress. So, for example, physical and structural stress. Examples of a structural stressor would be subluxations in the spine, so you need chiropractic care, which, by the way, can contribute a lot to ADHD. Or if you have a broken bone and your body's response is inflammation. Also, unintegrated reflexes would be cause for structural stress. We also have environmental stressors, such as environmental toxins, electromagnetic frequencies, vaccines, and synthetic medications. Internal stressors would be things such as the way we chemically metabolize food. Pathogens such as bacteria, yeast, and parasites, which is, by the way, much more common than people realize. Food sensitivities, which cause chronic inflammation when consumed regularly, especially wheat and gluten, which is the most common culprit for almost every person these days because of the way it has been genetically modified. Even to foods that we would normally consider healthy, such as broccoli. So those can also be sensitivities. So what's healthy for one person is not necessarily healthy for another. And we can also have hormone imbalances. So let's just take a look at this chart. Just simply, the circles represent different systems in our body. And when there's a problem in one of these areas, such as the ability to appropriately detoxify, which, by the way, is a huge problem in spectrum kids, and ADHD can be considered on that spectrum. It causes dysfunction with the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, that HPA axis, which is located in that center circle. It will cause an imbalance of cortisol to DHEA. Cortisol breaks down the body and DHEA builds it up, so we want a balance of the two. And it causes what we call metabolic chaos. So once there's dysfunction here, it can ripple out to any of these other areas on the outside, and even more. I mean, they're not all written down, but these are the big systems, or the big things, and they can be negatively affected. So therefore, we can have poor endocrine function or carbohydrate metabolism as a result of something that seems quite unrelated. So a big example of that is the thyroid. 80% of thyroid problems are secondary issues to something else. That means that treating the thyroid by itself isn't getting rid of the root of what's causing the problem in the first place. Okay, but we need to go in and try to relieve some of these other stressors which are underlying the problem. All of these dysfunctions are caused by some kind of either physical, emotional, or internal stressor. We need to be looking at a holistic approach. And doctors of Western medicine tends to have a tunnel vision. So in holistic and integrative medicine, the focus is on lifestyle changes. So functional diagnostic nutrition has coined the term Dress for Health Success, which stands for the 5 lifestyle changes: diet, rest, exercise, supplementation, and stress reduction. Diet, rest, exercise, and supplementation also reduce stress, but the stress reduction would include emotional stressors, things such as the pathogens found in the body or other stressors that aren't in those first 4 categories. This is nothing unique. If you go anywhere in the world of functional medicine, they're all going to be talking about the serious lifestyle changes and specific dietary changes that are critical, focusing on your diet, focusing on the amount of exercise you do, the types of supplements, and reducing stress. When you hear testimonies, they will tell you that their poor health escalated after starting, for example, a high-stress job or stress changes within their family. The one thing to note about diet is that there's no one-size-fits-all diet. It needs to be tailored to the individual person. So it's not like everybody should go on a paleo diet or everybody should go on a gluten-free diet. We all need to consider also the amount of rest. Many people are sleeping, going to bed too late, and the body cannot appropriately repair itself. Exercise. Some people are exercising too much. Vigorous exercise, such as marathon training, can break the body down because it releases a large amount of cortisol. So some people need to actually reduce their exercises while others just need to get up and start doing something. As far as supplementation, there are many nutrients that are void in our modern diet. The soil is not as mineral rich as it once was. And we may also need to supplement for a while with natural protocols if we do find that we have a yeast or parasite, or just to restore the microbiome in our gut as well as repairing the intestinal lining. So supplementation may be long-term if it's replacing, let's say, missed nutrients in the diet, and others might be short-term as we are finding opportunities for the body to heal itself and reduce some of its own stressors. Stress reduction, looking for the opportunities or to remove emotional and environmental stressors. Are we able to reduce or eliminate the chemicals from our environment? Do we need to switch our skincare products? When we are sleeping, do we need to get all those cell phone and wireless devices out of our bedroom? There are a lot of things that we need to do for stress reduction besides the emotional stressors. The emotional stressors also, though, can take a long time to deal with, especially if it requires you to reorganize your life, maybe put yourself into a low-stress situation, changing your job, moving to a less polluted environment, for example. So just a few basics. Breathing is probably the number one thing that you need to do well, and we're not doing enough of it, okay? So we need to do deep and intentional breathing throughout the day to fill our body with the appropriate amount of oxygen. Deep breathing can affect so much of our body. It can open up our non-dominant hemisphere. Okay? It can help us with our metabolic processes. So just breathing in for 3 seconds slowly, holding it for 3 seconds, and breathing out for 6 seconds is a very good technique. And just do it anytime you just stop and think about it. Do some deep breathing. Get some of that oxygen going in your body. Okay, we need to laugh. We need to love. We need to pray, and we need to have faith. Brain Gym is a tool that we looked at a little bit earlier. Especially in the classroom is a really good tool where we have large groups of students for stress reduction. It allows students to monitor their own stress and to maximize their learning potential. So Brain Gym focuses on whole brain learning, so accessing both hemispheres and increasing the connections from the front to back and from the inside out. Whether you're a teacher or a parent, You need to be able to recognize when your student needs a little time to relax and reorganize. We need to also teach the children to recognize in themselves when they need to stop and reorganize before they pass the tipping point where it is very difficult um, then diffuse the situation. So if you have a corner of the room that's calming with sensory gadgets or posters for exercises or other relaxation techniques, maybe from Brain Gym, or soft music that they can listen to in headphones if you're in the classroom, whether in the classroom or in the home, when you notice the children starting to lose it, stop and do pace or any other Brain Gym exercise or yoga, put on soft music. You can notice the posture in the children, and they tell you when they're stressed out or need a movement break. At Whole Child Learning Solutions, I believe we need to nourish, integrate, and educate our children. There are 3 parts to the program. The first, which we focused on today, which is FDN for kids. This is where I need to begin to make sure that we're building a good foundation by reducing the internal stressors that interfere with learning, such as food sensitivities, leaky gut, pathogens, or other internal stressors. When the body is not functioning optimally and there's a state of chronic inflammation, this also affects the brain and therefore learning and behavior. Then the next most important aspect is to get integrated. We barely touched on primitive reflexes when we mentioned fear paralysis and Moro, but there's a plethora of reflexes out there that directly affect learning and behavior. The problem is that when trying to integrate reflexes alone, they will not necessarily hold if the physiology of the child has not been addressed, such as removing inflammatory foods, mainly gluten. Children can indeed improve. And in fact, once I had a 5th grader who was severely stuck in fear paralysis, and she made remarkable gains, but after the summer break, she completely regressed. Her mother had known to remove gluten from her diet, but felt it was too difficult and didn't bother. So when I mentioned this to one of my mentors, who is a psychiatrist in Sweden and has worked extensively with patients who were schizophrenic, he reminded me that regression, especially of the FPR, is always a sign of gluten sensitivity, because gluten also affects our cerebellum, which is responsible for our balance and our movement and other parts of the brain. So if we want to get serious about integrating our children, we do need to work on their primitive reflexes. But if we want to be more serious about our work and ensure that all our work is not wasted, then we need to identify some of those internal stressors so that the progress can be maintained. And lastly, the third component is cognitive training, which might take place after about 6 months of reflex work. Children will be more ready for focused cognitive development. Okay, however, in most cases, once the first 2 are in place, the cognitive development will fall in line on its own. But, and we wouldn't do cognitive training on its own because the effects would be greatly enhanced once the child is more integrated and reducing exposures to substances that are interfering with the cognition. But we have to do steps 1 and 2 either consecutively or simultaneously. Oftentimes, focusing on one step is all that is necessary to reduce the brain inflammation, brain fog, and improve memory. But we cannot be trying to integrate the body and completely ignoring what is happening. So Whole Child Learning Solutions is a whole child approach. Here you see a variety of different programs which I incorporate into my practice. First, functional diagnostic nutrition is where we use the lab testing to help us identify hidden stressors and healing opportunities of the body, whether it's adjusting the diet, supporting the microbiome of the gut, or removing toxins from the environment. Brain Gym and rhythmic movement, Bloomberg rhythmic movement training, along with QRI harmonic laser, are the programs and methodologies I use collectively to help the child integrate his or her reflexes. The interactive metronome and the listening program are additional programs that can be done either in-house with me or as home programs that can help address some reflexes, as well as things like anxiety, attention, auditory processing, memory. And then there are other tools as well. So really looking at the child with the whole child approach, building that child from the inside out. So now, if you're a teacher or a parent of a child who is struggling or has special needs, please visit my website at www.wholechildlearningsolutions.com. I've compiled lots of good resources and have separated them for the teacher and the parent, although many of the information overlap. I've read and studied a lot over the last several years, and I've compiled the best of what I have read and learned into one location so that others would not have to search all over to find out what they need to know. Learning never stops, so I still do update. I have information on many of the reflexes and what you can do to get started at home, as well as book lists and product information of what I find or feel are the cream of the crop of the books and information. Please reach out to me through the contact page if you have any questions or would like me to see your child. They say that 1 in 6 children has a neurological problem, and by 2025, 1 in 2 will have autism. Those statistics are very scary to me, and we have to do something to turn this around. Thank you. May God bless you on your journey towards better learning and behavior of your child.